Hi, I'm Sienna Hartford. For 3 years, my family called my tattoos childish, unprofessional, a walking embarrassment to the Hartford name. They stopped inviting me to business dinners, cropped me out of holiday photos, and told investors I was going through a phase. What they didn't know was that every single line of ink on my skin represented a multimillion-dollar contract I'd closed without their help, without their network, without their approval. And the day they finally found out, the silence in that room was worth more than any apology they could have offered. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you first? Have you ever had to prove your worth to those who should have seen it all along? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in late September when I drove past the Camelback Country Club and saw the valet lineup stretching down the Palm Line driveway. I wasn't planning to stop. I had a product demo across town in 40 minutes and traffic through Scottsdale was already thickening under the desert sun. But something made me glance at the electronic board near the entrance, the one that announces private events and golf tournaments. Hartford family celebrates Brooke's promotion to senior partner. Champagne reception, members only. I sat at the red light longer than I needed to, watching well-dressed people filter through the brass doors. Women in pastel linen blazers. Men in crisp white shirts with rolled sleeves. Everyone looked like they belonged to something bigger than themselves, something polished and predictable and safe. I looked down at my forearm where a geometric compass design stretched from wrist to inner elbow, the ink still sharp after 2 years. That tattoo represented the Singapore expansion deal, the one that brought Nexicare Solutions into the Asian market. 12 million in revenue over 3 years. But to my family, it was just another mark that proved I wasn't serious. The light turned green and I drove away without calling, without texting, without expecting an explanation. This wasn't the first time I'd been left out. It was just the first time I'd accidentally caught them celebrating without even trying to hide it. Back at my apartment in Tempe, I unpacked my laptop bag and noticed the stack of mail I'd been ignoring for a week. Most of it was junk, promotional postcards from dental offices and refinancing offers I didn't need. But near the bottom of the pile was a cream-colored envelope with my name handwritten in elegant script. No return address. I opened it carefully and pulled out a single card embossed with gold lettering. The Hartford Legacy Gala, honoring 30 years of Hartford and Associates. Black tie optional. RSVP by October 5th. The date had already passed. I checked the postmark. It had been mailed 3 weeks ago to an address I hadn't lived at in over a year. I pulled up my phone and searched my email for anything from my mother or Brooke. Nothing. I checked my spam folder. Still nothing. Either they'd forgotten to update my address or they'd sent it to the wrong place on purpose, hoping I wouldn't show up to ask uncomfortable questions. I placed the invitation on my kitchen counter and stared at it while reheating leftover Thai food. The microwave hummed. The ceiling fan clicked in its uneven rhythm. Outside my window, the sunset turned the sky into shades of copper and violet, the kind of Arizona evening that used to make me feel hopeful. Now it just felt like wallpaper. My phone buzzed. A text from Kei Nakamura, my best friend since college and the only person who'd been there for every single deal, every pivot, every sleepless night spent rebuilding pitch decks. The message read, "Saw Brooke's Instagram. You okay?" I didn't respond right away. I just screenshotted the invitation and sent it to her without comment. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Are you going?" I typed back, "Haven't decided yet." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying moments I'd tried to forget. The time my father asked me to skip a family dinner because a major client was coming and he didn't want to explain why his daughter looked like she'd walked out of a tattoo parlor. The Christmas when Aunt Pauline pulled me aside and whispered that I was making it harder for Brooke to be taken seriously in her firm. The board meeting where my mother introduced Brooke as her daughter in consulting and me as her daughter who does something with computers. Something with computers. I'd built an AI-driven healthcare platform that was now operating in 6 countries. I had a team of 34 employees. I'd been featured in a Forbes profile about women disrupting the medical tech industry. And my own mother couldn't bring herself to say the name of my company out loud. I got out of bed and opened the closet in my hallway, the one I rarely touched because it was filled with things I didn't know what to do with yet. Old textbooks. A box of cables. A duffel bag stuffed with clothes I'd been meaning to donate. And tucked in the far corner, beneath a stack of folded sweaters, was a brown leather journal with a cracked spine and pages softened by time. My grandfather's journal. He'd given it to me the summer before he died, back when I was still in college trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I sat on the floor and opened it. His handwriting was small and precise, every letter carefully formed. Most of the entries were about business philosophy, notes from meetings, observations about people and deals and timing. But on the last page he'd written something just for me. Sienna, the world will try to tell you what success looks like. It will measure you in titles and square footage and how quiet you keep your ambitions. Don't let them. Build something that matters. Leave proof of your existence. Make them remember you were here. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, feeling the weight of it, the history embedded in the leather. He would have understood the tattoos. He would have asked me what each one meant and listened without interrupting, without judging, without suggesting I laser them off before the next family function. The next morning I showed up at my office in downtown Phoenix earlier than usual. The building was still mostly empty, just the hum of the HVAC system and the faint scent of cleaning solution in the halls. I made coffee in the break room and sat at my desk with the door open, watching the city wake up through the wide glass windows. My office wasn't large or extravagant, but it was mine. Framed articles on the wall. A whiteboard covered in diagrams and projections. A photo of my team at our first major product launch, everyone exhausted and grinning. I pulled up my calendar and scanned the upcoming weeks. Client meetings. Product reviews. A keynote speech at a healthcare innovation conference in Denver. My life was full. My work mattered. I had built something real. So why did a single missed invitation feel like it could hollow me out? Around 9, Zara Patel knocked on my doorframe. She'd been with me since the beginning, back when Nexicare was just an idea scribbled on napkins in a coffee shop. She was the one who helped me pitch our first investor, who stayed late debugging code when our demo crashed an hour before our presentation, who never once questioned whether we could pull this off. "You okay?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. "You've been staring at that email for 10 minutes. I glanced at my screen. I hadn't even realized I'd opened my inbox. The email was from my mother, sent at 7 that morning. The subject line read, "Family dinner this Sunday." The body of the message was brief. "We'd love for you to join us. Casual. Just family. Let me know if you can make it." No mention of the gala. No acknowledgement that I'd been left out. Just a polite request wrapped in the kind of language people use when they're trying to smooth over something without actually addressing it. "I don't know," I said. "It feels like a setup." Zara walked in and sat across from me. "Then don't go. You don't owe them anything." "I know. But part of me wants to see what they'll say. If they'll say anything at all." She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way she did when she was running probability scenarios in her head. "If you go, go with a plan. Don't just walk in hoping for the best. You know how they operate." She was right. My family didn't do spontaneous apologies or vulnerable conversations. They managed situations. They controlled narratives. If I was going to show up, I needed to be prepared for whatever story they'd already decided to tell. I spent the rest of the week working, deliberately not thinking about Sunday. We finalized a contract extension with a hospital network in Colorado. I reviewed new feature proposals from our product team. I had drinks with Kay on Thursday night and she told me about a gallery opening she was designing graphics for, something abstract and ambitious that made her eyes light up when she described it. For a few hours, I forgot about my family entirely. But Saturday night, as I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear, the anxiety crept back in. I picked a simple black dress, long sleeves that covered most of my tattoos except for the constellation pattern that peeked out near my collarbone. I almost changed into something with higher coverage, then stopped myself. I wasn't going to hide. Not anymore. Sunday afternoon arrived with cloudless skies and temperatures pushing into the low 90s. I drove to my parents' house in Arcadia, a neighborhood where every lawn looked professionally maintained and every driveway held cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The house itself was a sprawling ranch-style structure with terracotta tiles and a fountain in the front courtyard. I'd grown up here, but it hadn't felt like home in years. I parked on the street and walked up the stone path slowly, noticing the new landscaping, the updated light fixtures, the subtle changes that happen when you stop visiting regularly. The front door was unlocked. I let myself in and followed the sound of voices toward the back patio. They were all there. My father stood near the grill, tongs in hand, talking to cousin Trevor about interest rates and market corrections. My mother sat at the patio table arranging a cheese board with the kind of precision she applied to everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Brooke lounged on a wicker chair, sunglasses on, scrolling through her phone with a glass of white wine balanced on the armrest. Aunt Pauline was inside the kitchen, visible through the sliding glass door, rearranging something on the counter. No one noticed me at first. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them exist in their easy, comfortable rhythm. Then my mother looked up and her expression shifted, not quite a smile, more like the face you make when you're trying to remember if you locked the car. "Sienna," she said, standing. "You made it." I did. She walked over and kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and faintly floral. "We weren't sure if you'd come. You didn't RSVP. I didn't get the email until late." "Oh." She glanced at Brooke, then back at me. "Well, you're here now. That's what matters." My father waved from the grill, a casual gesture that could have meant hello or could have meant stay over there. Brooke looked up from her phone, lifted her sunglasses briefly, and gave me a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sienna," she said. "Love the dress." Very understated. I didn't respond. I just walked over to the table and poured myself a glass of iced tea from the pitcher, taking my time, letting the silence stretch. Aunt Pauline emerged from the kitchen holding a fruit platter. She stopped when she saw me, her gaze immediately dropping to my collarbone where the edge of my constellation tattoo was visible. "Still adding to the collection, I see," she said, her tone light but pointed. "Still judging people for their choices, I see," I replied, matching her tone exactly. My mother's smile tightened. "Let's not start, okay? It's a beautiful day. Let's just enjoy it." I sat down at the table, crossing my legs and leaning back in the chair like I had all the time in the world. Brooke put her phone down and studied me with the kind of look she used in depositions, searching for weaknesses, calculating her next move. "So," she said. "How's the little tech thing going?" "It's going well." "Still doing the healthcare stuff?" "Still doing the healthcare stuff." She nodded slowly. "That's great." "Really?" "I mean, it's brave, doing your own thing. Not everyone can handle that kind of uncertainty." There it was. The subtle dig. The implication that what I was doing was risky, unstable, less legitimate than her partnership at a century-old law firm. I took a sip of my tea and set the glass down gently. Uncertainty's only a problem if you don't know what you're doing. Trevor laughed from across the patio. "She's got you there, Brooke." Brooke's jaw tightened but she said nothing. My father flipped a burger and called out, "Food's almost ready. Everyone grab a plate." We ate on the patio, the conversation drifting through safe topics. Property values. Upcoming vacations. A charity auction my mother was organizing. I stayed quiet for most of it, answering when spoken to, nodding at appropriate moments, but mostly just observing. Watching how they moved around me like I was a piece of furniture they'd learned to navigate without really seeing. Then, as my mother was clearing plates, she said, "Oh, Sienna, I've been meaning to ask. Are you seeing anyone? It's been so long since you've brought someone around." I looked at her. "I've been busy." "I know, sweetheart. But you can't let work consume everything. You're not getting any younger." Brooke smirked into her wine glass. I stood up slowly, picking up my plate and walking it inside to the kitchen. My hands were steady but my pulse was climbing. I rinsed the plate in the sink and stared out the window at the backyard, at the pool that hadn't been used in years, at the rose bushes my mother obsessed over every spring. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Brooke appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "You know," she said quietly, "it wouldn't kill you to make an effort. Mom's just trying to connect." I turned off the water and faced her. Connecting would require actually knowing what's going on in my life. And whose fault is that? You're the one who disappeared. You stopped coming to things. Stopped answering calls. I stopped coming because I got tired of being introduced as the family disappointment. Her expression flickered. "No one's ever said that. You don't have to say it out loud." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you're so much better than us now. With your startup and your tattoos and your whole anti-establishment thing. But you're still here, Sienna. You still showed up. That tells me you care what we think, whether you want to admit it or not." I looked at her for a long moment, at the designer blouse and the perfectly styled hair and the confidence that came from never having to prove yourself to anyone. And I realized she was right. I did care. I cared too much. And that was the problem. "I didn't come here for approval," I said quietly. "I came to see if you'd even notice I existed." I walked past her, grabbed my purse from the entryway table, and left without saying goodbye. No dramatic exit. No slammed doors. Just a quiet departure that no one rushed to stop. I drove home with the windows down, letting the hot desert air whip through the car. My phone buzzed twice on the passenger seat but I didn't look at it. I knew it would be my mother, texting something carefully worded about how I'd misunderstood, how no one meant any harm, how I was being too sensitive again. That word always came up eventually. Sensitive. Like having feelings about being erased was somehow a character flaw. When I got back to my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and stood in the middle of my living room, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. I looked around at the space I'd built for myself. Bookshelves filled with industry publications and biographies of people who'd changed their fields. A desk where I'd drafted pitch decks at 3 a.m. Framed photos of my team celebrating milestones that my family never asked about. This was my life. This was real. So why did their dismissal still have the power to hollow me out? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Dante Williams' contact. He'd been my mentor since my second year building Nexicare, a retired entrepreneur who'd sold his medical device company for over $200 million and now spent his time advising founders who reminded him of his younger self. We met for coffee once a month, sometimes more if I was dealing with something complicated. I sent him a text asking if he had time to talk. He called me back within 5 minutes. "Sienna," his voice was warm and gravelly, the result of too many years talking over factory noise. "What's going on?" I told him everything. The missed invitation to Brooke's celebration. The gala I'd been deliberately excluded from. The Sunday dinner where my mother asked about my dating life instead of my business. The way Brooke had cornered me in the kitchen and suggested I was trying too hard to be different. He listened without interrupting, the way he always did. When I finished, there was a pause before he spoke. "You know what your problem is," he said finally. "I have a feeling you're about to tell me. You're still asking them for permission. Not out loud maybe, but in here." I could picture him tapping his chest. "You're still waiting for them to see you. To validate what you've built. And as long as you're waiting for that, they've got power over you." I sat down on my couch, pulling my knees up to my chest. "So what do I do?" "You stop waiting. You stop showing up hoping this time will be different. And you start documenting everything, because families like yours don't change until they're forced to see the truth in terms they can't ignore. Document what exactly? Everything they've said, everything they've done, every time they've diminished you or erased your accomplishments. Dates, witnesses, context. Treat it like a case you're building, because that's exactly what it is. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and thought about what documentation would even look like. I wasn't trying to sue anyone. I wasn't looking for a legal remedy. But Dante was right about one thing. My family operated in a world of proof, credentials, and official validation. They dismissed my tattoos because they couldn't see the deals behind them. They minimized my company because they didn't understand the revenue it generated. Maybe what I needed wasn't their approval. Maybe what I needed was to make the truth impossible to ignore. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I labeled it Hartford Record and started pulling together everything I could find. Screenshots of text messages where my mother had asked me not to attend events because clients would be there. Emails from Brooke suggesting I tone down my appearance for family photos. Photos from holidays where I'd been cropped out or positioned at the edge of the frame. I even found the original wedding invitation from Aunt Pauline's daughter's wedding 3 years ago, the one that had included a dress code note specifically mentioning that visible tattoos should be covered. Then I started documenting my business milestones. I pulled tax returns showing Nexicare's revenue growth year over year. I gathered press clippings from trade publications and mainstream outlets. I downloaded the Forbes profile that had called me one of the most promising founders in healthcare technology. I compiled letters from hospital administrators thanking us for improving patient outcomes. I created a spreadsheet listing every major deal I'd closed, the date it was finalized, and which tattoo corresponded to it. The phoenix rising on my shoulder blade. That was the first big contract, a 3-year partnership with a hospital network in Nevada that brought in $14 million in total revenue. I'd gotten that tattoo the day after the contract was signed, sitting in a small shop in Henderson while my hands still shook from adrenaline and disbelief that I'd actually pulled it off. The geometric compass on my forearm. That was the Singapore expansion, the deal that took Nexicare international and opened doors across Southeast Asia. $12 million in the first phase alone, with projections for twice that in year 2. The constellation pattern near my collarbone. That one represented the pharmaceutical partnership, a collaboration with a major drug manufacturer to integrate our AI platform into their clinical trial management system. $22 million over 5 years, with options for renewal. The abstract wave design on my ribcage that no one in my family had ever seen. That was the telehealth acquisition, the moment we bought out a struggling competitor and absorbed their technology and user base. $18 million in valuation, funded entirely by our existing revenue. And the minimalist mountain range on my inner wrist, the most recent addition. That was the government contract, a partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide AI-driven diagnostic support for rural VA clinics. $31 million over 7 years, the largest single contract we'd ever won. I stared at the numbers on my screen. $97 million in total contract value. All closed in the past 4 years. All while my family was suggesting I get a real job. It was past midnight when I finally closed my laptop. My neck ached from sitting in the same position for hours. My tea had gone cold. But I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger exactly, but clarity. A sense of direction. The next morning I woke up to a voicemail from my mother. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play. Sienna, honey, I don't know what happened yesterday, but you left so abruptly and I just want you to know that we love you. We've always loved you. I think maybe you're under a lot of stress with work and everything, and that's understandable, but we're family. We should be able to talk about things. Give me a call when you get a chance, okay? I miss you. The message was perfectly crafted. Concerned but not apologetic. Loving but conditional. It placed the burden of reconciliation entirely on me while accepting zero responsibility for anything that had happened. I saved it to a folder on my phone labeled Family Communications and moved on with my day. Work kept me busy for the next week. We had a major product update rolling out and the team was putting in long hours to make sure everything launched smoothly. I spent most of my time in the office, reviewing code, sitting in on user testing sessions, and preparing materials for investor updates. It was easier to focus on problems I could actually solve. But on Friday afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He says he's from Hartford and Associates." My stomach dropped. Did he say what he wants? Just that it's a personal matter. He seemed official. I told her to send him in. A moment later, a man in his 50s appeared in my doorway, wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He had the look of someone who'd spent decades in corporate law, polished and unreadable. "Miss Hartford," he said, extending his hand. "My name is Leonard Ashford. I'm the senior counsel for Hartford and Associates. Do you have a few minutes?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What's this about?" He sat down and opened his briefcase, pulling out a slim folder. "I'm here on behalf of your father. He's asked me to discuss a sensitive family matter with you, one that involves the future of the firm." "I'm not involved with the firm. I never have been." "I understand that. But there's a complication that's recently come to light, and it involves you directly." He slid a document across my desk. It was a copy of my grandfather's will, dated 8 years ago, just a few months before he died. I'd seen it before, briefly, at the reading after his funeral. Most of his estate had been divided between my father and Aunt Pauline, with some smaller bequests to grandchildren. I'd received a modest trust fund that I'd used to help launch Nexicare. "I'm familiar with this," I said. "I'm sure you are. But there's a second document that was recently discovered during an estate audit. A codicil that your grandfather filed separately, one that wasn't included in the original reading." He pulled out another paper, this one older and slightly yellowed. The letterhead was from a different law firm, one I didn't recognize. I scanned the text quickly, my heart rate climbing as I read. "In the event that Sienna Hartford demonstrates substantial business success independent of family resources, as evidenced by revenue exceeding $10 million annually for 3 consecutive years, she shall be granted first right of refusal for any sale or transfer of Hartford and Associates, as well as a board seat with equal voting rights to all existing partners." I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. This is real? It was notarized and filed with the original estate documents. We only found it because we're preparing for a potential acquisition and had to review all legacy agreements. Your grandfather apparently wanted to ensure that entrepreneurial success was recognized and rewarded within the family structure, regardless of which path that success took. Does my father know about this? He does now. That's why I'm here. He asked me to speak with you privately before this becomes a broader family discussion. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. What exactly is he asking me to do? Leonard folded his hands on the folder. He's hoping you'll waive your rights under the codicil. He believes it would be disruptive to the firm's succession plan, and he's prepared to offer you a financial settlement in exchange for your agreement to step aside. How much? $500,000. I almost laughed. My company generated $31 million in revenue last year alone. You think $500,000 is adequate compensation for giving up board control of a firm worth considerably more than that? It's a starting point for negotiations. Tell my father I need time to review this with my own attorney. And tell him I'm not interested in being bought out of something my grandfather specifically intended for me to have. Leonard nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response. I'll relay your message. But Miss Hartford, I'd encourage you to consider carefully. Family businesses are complicated, and inserting yourself into Hartford and Associates at this stage could create conflict that benefits no one. Creating conflict isn't my goal. Claiming what's rightfully mine is. He stood, gathering his papers. I'll be in touch. After he left, I sat alone in my office as the sun dropped lower over the Phoenix skyline. The city glowed orange and pink, beautiful and indifferent. I pulled up my phone and called Dante. I need a lawyer, I said when he answered. A good one. Someone who specializes in estate law and family business disputes. What happened? I told him about the codicil, about my grandfather's conditional bequest, about my father's attempt to pay me off before I could exercise my rights. Dante was quiet for a moment. Your grandfather was a smart man. He was. But now I have to figure out what to do with what he left me. You already know what to do, Sienna. The question is whether you're ready to do it. He was right. I did know. I'd been building toward this moment for 4 years without realizing it. Every deal I'd closed. Every tattoo I'd gotten. Every time I'd chosen my own path instead of the one my family had laid out for me. It had all been preparation for this. I spent the weekend researching estate attorneys in Phoenix. I read reviews, looked at case histories, and eventually settled on a woman named Vivian Cross who had a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and impossible to intimidate. On Monday morning I called her office and explained the situation. She agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Her office was in a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel with views that stretched to the mountains. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp features and eyes that didn't miss anything. Tell me everything, she said, once we were seated in her conference room. I walked her through the family history. My grandfather's relationship with me. The way my father had always favored Brooke. The years I'd spent building Nexicare while being dismissed and excluded. The recent discovery of the codicil. My father's offer to buy me out. Vivian took notes on a legal pad, her handwriting small and precise. When I finished, she looked up. Do you have documentation of your company's revenue? Tax returns, audited financials, client contracts, everything. And the codicil, you have a copy? I pulled it from my bag and slid it across the table. She read it carefully, then looked up with something that might have been a smile. This is airtight. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing. The language is clear, the conditions are measurable, and it was properly filed. If your revenue meets the threshold, and I'm guessing it does, then you have every legal right to claim this seat. What happens if my father refuses? Then we file a petition with the probate court to enforce the codicil. It'll be public. It'll be messy. And based on what you've told me about your family, it'll force conversations they've been avoiding for years. I don't want to destroy the family business. You're not destroying anything. You're claiming something that was always meant to be yours. There's a difference. I looked out the window at the city below, at all the lives being lived in buildings and cars and parks, all the people navigating their own complicated relationships and impossible choices. If I do this, there's no going back. No, Vivian agreed. There isn't. But from what you've described, going back was never really an option anyway. She was right. I'd been trying to go back for years, trying to find a version of my family that could see me clearly, that could celebrate my success instead of diminishing it. But that version didn't exist. Maybe it never had. What do I need to do? Vivian pulled out a fresh legal pad. First, we document everything. Every exclusion, every dismissal, every attempt to minimize your accomplishments. Then we gather proof of your company's performance. Financial statements, press coverage, client testimonials, anything that demonstrates you've met the conditions of the codicil. Finally, we prepare a formal notice of intent to claim your board seat. We send it certified mail to your father and every other partner at Hartford and Associates. We make it official. How long will that take? If you can get me the documentation within a week, I can have the notice ready to send by the end of the month. I thought about my father receiving that letter. I thought about Brooke's reaction. I thought about my mother calling to ask why I was doing this, why I couldn't just let it go, why I had to make everything so difficult. And then I thought about my grandfather, sitting in his study with that leather journal, writing notes about integrity and legacy and making sure the people who worked hardest weren't forgotten. He'd seen something in me that my parents couldn't or wouldn't see. He believed I could build something meaningful. And he'd made sure I'd have a place at the table if I succeeded. Let's do it, I said. Over the next week, I worked with Vivian's team to compile everything. I pulled financial records going back to Nexicare's founding. I gathered board minutes and investor reports. I created a detailed timeline of every major milestone, cross-referenced with press coverage and third-party validation. I even tracked down former colleagues who'd witnessed my family's treatment of me at various events, people who could testify if needed that the exclusion was real and ongoing. Zara helped me organize the business documentation. Kay helped me create a visual presentation showing the correlation between each tattoo and its corresponding deal, complete with contract dates and revenue figures. Dante reviewed everything with the eye of someone who'd been through similar battles and knew what details mattered most. By the end of the week, we had a case file 3 inches thick. Vivian reviewed it in her office while I sat across from her, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "This is comprehensive," she said finally. "More than we need, actually, but that's better than the alternative. The codicil is enforceable on its own, but this additional documentation makes it clear that you didn't just meet the technical requirements. You exceeded them significantly. That matters." "Why?" "Because if this goes to court, which it might, the judge will be looking at your grandfather's intent. He didn't just want you to be successful. He wanted to reward exceptional success. And that's exactly what you've demonstrated." She drafted the formal notice that afternoon. It was 2 pages, written in the precise language of legal documents, but the message was clear. I was exercising my rights under the codicil. I was claiming my board seat. And I expected full compliance within 30 days. "Once we send this," Vivian said, "things will move quickly. Your father will likely try to negotiate. He may offer more money. He may suggest alternative arrangements. But the law is on your side, and unless they want a protracted legal battle, they'll have to accept your claim. What if they do want a legal battle? Then we give them one. And we win." I signed the notice and watched as her assistant prepared it for certified mail. 3 copies, one for my father, one for Brooke in her capacity as junior partner, and one for the firm's managing director. All of them would arrive on the same day. All of them would have to be signed for, creating a paper trail that couldn't be denied or dismissed. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of my apartment complex settling around me. Footsteps overhead. A door closing somewhere down the hall. The distant hum of traffic on the highway. I kept thinking about the moment my father would open that envelope. The expression on his face. The phone call that would inevitably follow. Part of me wanted to call him first, to explain, to try one more time to make him understand. But I knew how that conversation would go. He'd tell me I was being irrational. He'd say I was trying to punish him for perceived slights. He'd suggest I was throwing away the family relationship over money and pride. And he'd be wrong on every count. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about money. It was about recognition. It was about standing in a room full of people who'd spent years treating me like I didn't matter and forcing them to see that I did. That I always had. The notices went out on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, my phone started ringing. The first call came from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The second came from my mother's cell. I silenced it. The third was from Brooke, and when I saw her name flash across my screen, I almost answered just to hear what she'd say. But I didn't. I waited. By evening, I had 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails. I listened to them in order, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of water I wasn't drinking. My mother's voice came first, tight and controlled. "Sienna, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish here, but we need to talk. Please call me back as soon as you get this." Then my father, who rarely called me directly. "Sienna, I've received some paperwork from an attorney claiming to represent you. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Call me." The last one was Brooke, and her tone was different. Not angry exactly, but clipped and professional, like she was reading from a script she'd prepared. "Sienna, this is really inappropriate timing. Dad's been under a lot of stress with the acquisition talks, and now you're throwing this at him? We both know you don't actually want to be involved in the firm. So whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Let's talk about a reasonable resolution before this gets out of hand. I saved all 3 messages and sent the files to Vivian. She'd told me to document everything, and I was learning to take that instruction seriously. That night, I made dinner for the first time in weeks. Nothing elaborate, just pasta with vegetables and a bottle of wine I'd been saving for something worth celebrating. I wasn't sure this qualified as celebration, but it felt like a milestone. I'd done something I couldn't take back. I'd stepped into a conflict I'd been avoiding my entire adult life. And instead of feeling terrified, I felt strangely calm. Kay came over around 8. I'd texted her earlier and she'd shown up with dessert from the bakery near her apartment, the one that made elaborate fruit tarts that were almost too pretty to eat. "So," she said, settling onto my couch with a plate balanced on her knees. "How does it feel to officially blow up your family?" I didn't blow up anything. I just claimed something that was legally mine. Semantics. They're going to treat it like a nuclear option. Probably. She took a bite of tart and studied me. "You're different. You seem solid." "I don't know about solid. But I'm tired of shrinking." "Good. You've been shrinking around them for years. It's honestly been painful to watch." I looked at her, surprised by the directness. Kay was usually more diplomatic. "I mean it," she continued. "Every time you'd come back from a family thing, you'd be deflated for days. Like they'd managed to convince you that everything you'd built didn't matter. And I kept waiting for you to realize that their opinion wasn't the one that counted. I'm glad you finally did." We talked for hours, the way we used to in college when everything felt possible and complicated at the same time. She told me about a project she was working on for a client who kept changing their mind about the aesthetic direction. I told her about the upcoming product launch and the healthcare conference where I'd be speaking in November. Normal life things. Reminders that my world was bigger than my family's orbit. After she left, I cleaned up the kitchen and checked my email. There was a message from Vivian with the subject line, "First response." I opened it. "Your father's attorney contacted me this afternoon. They're requesting a meeting to discuss terms. They've proposed next Tuesday at their offices. I've suggested a neutral location instead. Waiting for confirmation. Be prepared for them to make another financial offer. Remember, you don't have to accept anything you're not comfortable with." I wrote back confirming that I'd be available Tuesday and asking if she thought I should bring anyone else. She replied within minutes. "Just you and me. Keep it small and focused." The more people in the room, the more opportunity for things to escalate. The weekend passed slowly. I went to the gym Saturday morning and ran on the treadmill until my legs burned and my mind finally quieted. I worked from home Sunday, reviewing product specs and answering emails from clients in different time zones. I avoided social media, knowing that someone in my family had probably posted something cryptic about loyalty or blood being thicker than water, the kind of performative sentiment that was really a coded message to everyone in their circle. Monday morning I went into the office early and called a team meeting. I'd been distracted for weeks, and it was starting to show. I needed to refocus on the work that actually mattered, the reason I'd built this company in the first place. "I know I've been scattered lately," I told my team, gathered in our main conference room with coffee and laptops. "And I appreciate everyone picking up the slack. I'm dealing with some family stuff that's complicated, but it shouldn't affect what we're doing here. So let's talk about where we are with the product launch and what needs to happen over the next 2 weeks." Zara pulled up the project timeline on the screen. We went through each milestone, identifying bottlenecks and reassigning tasks. It felt good to focus on problems that had clear solutions, on work where effort translated directly into results. After the meeting, Zara hung back. "You doing okay?" "I will be. Just need to get through this week." "The family thing, is it serious?" "It's becoming serious. But it's also necessary." She nodded, not pushing for details. That was one of the things I valued about Zara. She knew when to ask questions and when to just offer quiet support. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonable heat. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blazer and tailored pants, professional but not corporate. I left my tattoos visible. If they wanted to dismiss me as unprofessional, they could do it while I was claiming my legal rights. Vivian had arranged for us to meet at a conference room in a downtown office building, neutral territory that belonged to neither family. I arrived 15 minutes early and found her already there, setting up documents on the long table. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'm going to be. Remember, this is just an initial conversation. We're here to listen to their position and clarify yours. No decisions have to be made today." My father arrived exactly on time, accompanied by Leonard Ashford and another man I didn't recognize. My father looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer at the temples, lines deeper around his eyes. He nodded at me but didn't speak. We all sat down, facing each other across the polished wood table. Leonard opened a folder and began speaking in the measured tones of someone who'd done this many times before. "We appreciate you agreeing to meet. We believe there's an opportunity here to resolve this matter in a way that benefits everyone involved." Vivian remained silent, letting him continue. "Mr. Hartford acknowledges the validity of the codicil and your right to claim a board seat under the conditions specified. However, he believes that your active participation in the firm's operations would create significant complications given your lack of experience in traditional consulting and the ongoing acquisition negotiations." "I'm not interested in running daily operations," I said. "I'm interested in having a voice in major decisions, which is exactly what the codicil grants me." "Understood. But you have to appreciate the position this puts the firm in. We're in delicate talks with a potential buyer. Having an unexpected board member appear at this stage raises questions about governance and stability. Then maybe you should have disclosed the codicil earlier." My father spoke for the first time. "We didn't know about it, Sienna. It was buried in estate documents that no one had reason to review until now." "You didn't know, or you didn't want to know?" His jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means grandfather told me about that codicil 3 years before he died. He explained exactly what it was and why he was including it. So either you genuinely never looked at his estate papers closely enough to find it, or you found it and hoped I'd never meet the conditions." The room went silent. Leonard glanced at my father, who was staring at the table. "He told you," my father said finally. "The summer before my junior year of college. We were sitting in his study and he showed me the draft. He said he wanted to make sure that success was recognized in our family regardless of what form it took. That if I built something real and substantial on my own terms, I'd have earned a place at the table. And you never mentioned this to me. You never asked about my conversations with him. You never asked about anything I was doing, as long as it didn't interfere with the family image." Vivian placed a hand on the table, gently redirecting. "Gentlemen, I think we're getting off track. The history is interesting, but what matters now is the legal reality. My client has met the conditions specified in the codicil. She's entitled to claim her board seat. The question is whether you're going to honor that entitlement or force us to seek a court order." The other man spoke up for the first time. I learned later he was the firm's managing director, brought in specifically to handle the business implications. "We'd like to propose an alternative arrangement. Ms. Hartford would receive quarterly briefings on the firm's performance and strategic direction. She'd have the right to review major contracts and provide input. But she wouldn't hold an official board seat or voting rights. In exchange, we'd offer her a percentage of the acquisition proceeds when the sale closes." "How much?" I asked. 3%. Based on current projections, that's approximately $2.8 million. I looked at Vivian. She kept her expression neutral, but I could read the slight tension in her shoulders. It was a significant offer. More money than I'd probably see from board participation alone. But it wasn't what my grandfather had intended. "No," I said. My father's head snapped up. "Sienna, that's a generous offer. More than generous. It's a buyout. You're asking me to accept money in exchange for giving up the thing grandfather specifically wanted me to have. A seat at the table. An equal vote. Recognition that I've earned my place in this family's legacy. You're not part of this firm's legacy, Brooke's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard her arrive. She stood there in a charcoal dress with her arms crossed, looking like she'd walked straight out of a courtroom. You've never worked here. You don't understand the culture or the client relationships or any of the history that makes Hartford and Associates what it is. I understand more than you think. She walked into the room and sat down at the far end of the table. This is about your ego. You're mad because Mom and Dad didn't celebrate your little tech company the way you wanted, so now you're trying to force your way into something you don't actually care about. You're right that I don't care about the firm, I said evenly. But I care about what Grandfather intended. And I care about not being erased anymore. No one erased you. Really? When was the last time Mom mentioned my company by name? When was the last time either of you asked about a contract I'd closed or a product we'd launched? We asked. You were always too busy to come to family things. I stopped coming because every time I did, I left feeling like I didn't exist. My father stood abruptly. This is getting emotional. We should take a break. I don't need a break, I said. I need you to decide whether you're going to honor the codicil or fight it in court. Because those are your only two options. Leonard cleared his throat. Miss Hartford, if I may suggest, litigation would be expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. It would likely delay or derail the acquisition. It would definitely damage family relationships that are already strained. Is that really what you want? What I want is to stop being treated like an inconvenience. What I want is for my family to acknowledge that I've built something significant. What I want is the board seat my grandfather promised me if I succeeded. That's it. That's all I've ever wanted. Vivian stood. I think we've covered the essential positions. Why don't we give you some time to discuss internally and reconvene in a few days? My client's position is clear. She's willing to work collaboratively with the existing board, but she's not willing to surrender rights that were legally granted to her. We left them sitting there and walked out into the bright afternoon. The heat hit like a wall after the air-conditioned conference room. I felt shaky but also strangely exhilarated, like I'd just finished running a race I'd been training for without realizing it. That was good, Vivian said. You stayed calm, you articulated your position clearly, and you didn't get drawn into emotional arguments. Brooke's going to keep pushing. Let her. She doesn't have any legal standing here. The only people who matter are the existing board members, and they're going to have to decide whether fighting you is worth the cost. We walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away and sat outside, reviewing what had happened and discussing next steps. Vivian thought they'd come back with one more offer, probably higher, before accepting that I wasn't going to back down. How high do you think they'll go? I asked. 5 million, maybe more. Your father's desperate to close this acquisition, and you're the only thing standing in the way. I'm not standing in the way. I'm just asking to be included. To him, that's the same thing. I spent the rest of the week working and waiting. No calls from my family. No texts. Just silence, which was somehow worse than confrontation. Kay called it the freeze-out strategy. Make me uncomfortable enough with the silence that I'd break first and offer a compromise just to end the tension. But I'd learned something in the past few years of building Nexicare. Silence didn't scare me anymore. I'd spend enough late nights alone in my office, enough early mornings wondering if I'd made the right choice, enough quiet moments doubting myself. I knew how to sit with discomfort. I knew how to wait. Friday afternoon, Vivian called. They want to meet again. Monday morning, same location. Leonard said they have a proposal they think you'll find acceptable. Did he give any details? No. But he sounded less combative than last time. I think they're ready to negotiate seriously. That weekend I drove out to South Mountain Park and hiked one of the trails I used to run in college. The desert was golden in the late afternoon light, all sage and sand and ancient rock formations that had been standing long before my family's drama and would be standing long after. It gave me perspective. This fight wasn't life or death. It was just a fight about recognition and respect. Important, but not everything. On Sunday night, I got a text from an unknown number. It took me a moment to realize it was from my father's personal cell, not his business line. The message was short. "Can we talk before the meeting tomorrow? Just you and me?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "What do you want to talk about?" "Everything. Nothing specific. I just think we should speak privately before lawyers get involved again." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep everything formal and documented. But another part of me, the part that still remembered being his daughter before I became the family disappointment, wanted to hear what he'd say without Leonard scripting his responses. "Okay. Where?" "There's a diner on Camelback and 32nd Street. 7 tomorrow morning?" "I'll be there." I texted Vivian to let her know I was meeting my father alone. She wrote back immediately. "Be careful. Don't agree to anything without running it by me first. And if you can, record the conversation." I showed up at the diner at 6:55. It was the kind of place that served breakfast all day and still had vinyl booths that squeaked when you sat down. My father was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a newspaper he wasn't reading. I slid into the seat across from him. A waitress appeared immediately and I ordered coffee, black. "Thanks for coming," he said. "You said you wanted to talk." He folded the newspaper and set it aside. For a moment he just looked at me, really looked at me, in a way he hadn't in years. His eyes caught on the constellation tattoo near my collarbone. "When did you get that one?" he asked. 2 years ago. It represents the pharmaceutical partnership. $22 million contract." He blinked. 22 million? Each tattoo represents a major deal. "I thought you knew that." "How would I know that?" "You never told us." I tried to. "Remember the Christmas 3 years ago when I started to explain the Singapore expansion and Mom changed the subject to ask if I was seeing anyone?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "Your mother worries. She worries about the wrong things." The coffee arrived and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to focus on besides his expression. "Your grandfather really told you about the codicil?" he asked. "He did. He said he'd watched you and Aunt Pauline inherit the firm without ever having to prove yourselves outside of it. He wanted to make sure that if someone in the next generation built something independently, they'd still have a place in the family's business legacy. He never told me that. Maybe he didn't think you'd understand. Or maybe he didn't trust me to honor it. That honesty surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness, justification. Not acknowledgement. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Why didn't you look for it after he died?" "Because I didn't think it existed. And maybe because part of me didn't want it to exist. The firm was supposed to go to Brooke. That was always the plan. She went to law school specifically to prepare for it. She clerked, she networked, she did everything right. And I didn't. You did things differently. And I didn't know how to value that." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the city was waking up. Cars passing. People heading to work. Life continuing regardless of our family's internal struggle. "What do you want, Sienna?" he asked finally. "Really want?" "I want you to acknowledge that I've succeeded. I want you to stop treating my choices like they're embarrassing. I want a seat at the table, literally and figuratively. And if I give you the board seat, will that be enough? Or is this just the beginning of you trying to take over the firm?" "I don't want to take over anything. I have my own company to run. But I want voting rights on major decisions. I want quarterly involvement. I want to be part of the family business legacy that grandfather intended for me." He picked up his coffee and took a long drink. "The acquisition we're negotiating, it's our best exit opportunity. The firm is worth more now than it's ever been, and we have a buyer willing to pay full value. But they want a clean governance structure. If we bring you onto the board right now, it complicates the story we've been telling them. Then tell them the truth. That a previously unknown codicil has surfaced and the board is expanding to include a successful entrepreneur with healthcare industry expertise. If anything, that strengthens your position. He smiled slightly. When did you get so good at business strategy? I've been doing this for 4 years. You'd know that if you'd ever asked. The waitress returned to refill our coffee cups and asked if we wanted to order food. My father ordered eggs and toast. I asked for oatmeal I probably wouldn't eat. After she left, he leaned back against the worn vinyl and crossed his arms. Brooke is going to fight this, he said. I know. She thinks you're doing it to hurt her. I'm not. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't have rights just to protect her feelings. She's worked toward this her entire career. Taking over the firm was supposed to be her defining achievement. And building Nexicare from nothing was supposed to be mine. But you didn't celebrate that. You barely acknowledged it. He looked down at his coffee. I didn't understand what you were building. It seemed risky. I thought you'd eventually come back and join the firm once you got the startup phase out of your system. I was never going to do that. I see that now. The food arrived and we ate in silence for a few minutes. The diner filled up around us with the breakfast crowd, construction workers and nurses coming off night shifts and elderly couples who probably came here every morning. Normal people living normal lives without the weight of family legacy pressing down on every decision. What if I could make Brooke understand? He asked eventually. What if we could find a way for both of you to be involved without it feeling like you're taking something from her? You can't make her understand something she doesn't want to understand. She's spent her whole life being the good daughter, the one who did everything you asked. She sees me as the one who rejected the family plan. She's not going to suddenly be okay with me having equal power. So what do we do? You honor the codicil. You give me the board seat. And you let Brooke deal with her feelings about it. He rubbed his temples. Your mother is going to lose her mind. Mom lost her mind the first time I came home with a tattoo. She'll survive this too. He almost smiled at that. Almost. We finished eating and he paid the check. As we walked out into the parking lot, he stopped beside his car. I'm not saying I agree with everything you're doing, he said. But I respect that you've built something real. I should have said that years ago. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was more than I'd gotten from him in a decade, and I decided to take it for what it was. I'll see you at the meeting, I said. He nodded and got in his car. I watched him drive away, then sat in my own car for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed. A text from Vivian asking how it went. I wrote back, better than expected. He's ready to negotiate. The meeting that morning was different from the first one. The tension was still there, but it felt less hostile, more transactional. Leonard laid out a revised proposal. I would get the board seat with full voting rights. In exchange, I would agree to abstain from votes directly related to the acquisition until it closed, at which point my role would be evaluated based on the new ownership structure. Why would I abstain? I asked. Because you have a conflict of interest, Brooke said from across the table. She'd been silent until now, but I could see she'd been holding that line in reserve. You have no stake in the firm succeeding. If anything, you benefit from it failing because it makes your company look better by comparison. That's ridiculous. Is it? You've spent years building yourself up as the alternative to the family business. Now you want to be part of it? That doesn't make sense unless you're trying to sabotage the sale. Vivian cut in before I could respond. Ms. Hartford has no motivation to sabotage anything. But the abstention clause is reasonable given the timing. My client would agree to abstain from acquisition-related votes in exchange for full participation in all other board matters, with the understanding that her role continues after the acquisition closes. I looked at Vivian. She gave me a small nod. It was a compromise, but not one that gave away anything essential. I'd still get the seat. I'd still have a voice. I just have to wait for the acquisition to finalize before that voice carried equal weight on that specific decision. Fine, I said. I'll agree to that. My father let out a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. Leonard made notes on his legal pad. Brooke stared at me like she was trying to figure out if I'd just won or lost. There's one more thing, Leonard said. We'll need you to sign a confidentiality agreement regarding all board matters and a statement that you'll act in the best interests of Hartford and Associates in your capacity as a board member. Standard language? Vivian asked. Entirely standard. Then we'll agree to that as well. The paperwork took another hour to finalize. Vivian reviewed every line while I sat there feeling like I was floating outside my body, watching this happen to someone else. When everything was signed and notarized, Leonard stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the board, Ms. Hartford. I shook his hand, then my father's. Brooke left without saying anything. The managing director congratulated me with the kind of stiff formality that made it clear he thought this was a terrible idea but was too professional to say so. Outside, Vivian and I stood on the sidewalk in the midday heat. She adjusted her sunglasses and smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. You did it, she said. I did. How does it feel? Honestly? Exhausting. She laughed. That's normal. The adrenaline crash is real. Go home, take a nap, and tomorrow you can start figuring out what being a board member actually means. I drove back to my apartment in a daze. Everything looked the same but felt different, like I'd traveled somewhere distant and returned to find my old life waiting exactly where I'd left it. I changed into comfortable clothes and lay down on my couch, intending to rest for a few minutes. I woke up 3 hours later to my phone ringing. It was Kay. I heard. Zara told me. Are you okay? I think so. Want company? Always. She showed up an hour later with takeout from the Thai place we both loved and a bottle of wine that was probably too expensive for a Tuesday afternoon. We ate on my tiny balcony, watching the sun drop toward the horizon and turn the sky into shades of amber and violet. So you're a board member now, Kay said, refilling my wine glass. Apparently. Are you going to wear a suit? Get business cards that say board member Sienna Hartford? I'm going to do exactly what I've been doing, just with a seat at quarterly meetings. But it's more than that though, right? It's proof that you matter to them. I thought about that. I don't know if I matter to them. But I matter to myself now. And I think that's actually more important. She raised her glass. I'll drink to that. We talked until the sky went dark and the city lights spread out below us like scattered jewels. She told me about a new project she'd been offered, designing the visual identity for a women's shelter that was expanding into 3 new locations. I told her about the product features we were testing and the feedback we'd gotten from hospital administrators who said our platform had reduced diagnostic errors by 18%. Normal things. Important things. The things that had always mattered even when my family couldn't see them. After Kay left, I opened my laptop and checked my email. There was a message from my mother, the first direct contact I'd had from her since the legal process started. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" I opened it. Sienna, I know things have been difficult lately. Your father told me about the meeting and the agreement you reached. I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, even if I don't fully understand why this was so important to you. I'd like to have lunch sometime, just the 2 of us. No agenda, no lawyers, just a chance to talk. Let me know if you're open to that. Love, Mom. I read it 3 times, looking for hidden meanings or subtle manipulations. But it seemed genuine, or as genuine as my mother ever got. I wrote back, I'm open to lunch. Let me know when and where. I didn't add anything about forgiveness or moving forward. Just acknowledgement that I'd received her message and was willing to meet. The next few weeks passed in a strange rhythm. I went to work every day and focused on the product launch that was now just 10 days away. I attended my first Hartford and Associates board meeting, where I sat quietly and listened to discussions about client retention and revenue projections. Brooke ignored me completely. My father acknowledged me with professional courtesy and nothing more. The managing director treated me like a guest who was overstaying their welcome. But I was there. I had a seat. I had a vote. And slowly, I started to understand the family business in ways I never had before. The client relationships that had been built over decades. The consultants who'd worked there for 20 years and knew every detail of the firm's operations. The careful balance between maintaining tradition and adapting to market changes. I also started to see why my grandfather had included that codicil. The firm was stable but stagnant. It operated the same way it had in the 80s, resistant to technology, suspicious of change. My father and the other senior partners were brilliant at what they did, but they were trapped in a model that was slowly becoming obsolete. After one particularly long meeting about whether to update their client management software, I pulled my father aside. "You need to modernize," I said. "We've been doing fine with our current systems. You've been doing fine in spite of your current systems. But if you want to compete for younger clients and bigger contracts, you need infrastructure that actually works." He looked at me for a long moment. "Do you have recommendations?" I did. I spent the next week putting together a proposal for updating Hartford and Associates' technology infrastructure. Client management software. Project tracking tools. Data analytics capabilities. I made it clear that I wasn't trying to turn them into a tech company, just bringing them into the current century. I presented it at the next board meeting. Brooke looked skeptical. The managing director asked pointed questions about cost and implementation timelines. But my father listened carefully, and when I finished, he nodded. "Let's explore this. Sienna, would you be willing to oversee the evaluation process?" "I can do that." It wasn't a dramatic victory. It wasn't even particularly exciting. But it was real involvement, real contribution. It was proof that my perspective had value beyond just claiming my legal rights. That Friday, I met my mother for lunch at a quiet restaurant in Paradise Valley. She was already seated when I arrived, wearing a cream-colored blouse and pearl earrings, looking exactly like the version of herself she showed the world. "You look well," she said as I sat down. "So do you." We ordered salads and made small talk about the weather and her upcoming trip to visit Aunt Pauline. Then, as the food arrived, she set down her fork and looked at me directly. "I want to apologize," she said. I paused mid-bite. "For what specifically?" "For not seeing you. For not understanding what you were building. For treating your tattoos like they were rebellious instead of meaningful." "What changed?" "Your father told me what each one represents. The deals, the revenue, the success you've had. And I realized I'd been so focused on what you weren't doing that I missed what you were accomplishing." I set down my own fork. "I tried to tell you. Multiple times. I know. I didn't listen. I was so worried about what other people would think, about how your choices reflected on the family. I missed the fact that you were making your own family, your own legacy. I'm still making it. I can see that now." We ate in silence for a moment. I wanted to believe her. I wanted this to be the turning point where everything changed. But I'd had too many conversations with my mother over the years where she said the right words without actually changing her behavior. "Mom, I appreciate the apology. But I need you to understand something. I'm not going to keep showing up hoping for validation. I'm not going to keep trying to prove myself to people who've already decided I'm not enough. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on who I actually am, not who you wish I was." She nodded slowly. "That's fair. And that means accepting the tattoos. Accepting my company. Accepting that I'm never going to be Brooke. I don't want you to be Brooke. I want you to be happy. Then ask me about my work. Ask me what I'm proud of. Ask me about the speech I'm giving in Denver next month or the hospital network that just renewed our contract for 3 more years. Ask me about my actual life instead of when I'm going to settle down and give you grandchildren. I can do that." We finished lunch and talked about easier things. She told me about a garden project she was planning, and I told her about Kay's gallery opening. It wasn't deep or transformative, but it was civil. It was a start. As we walked to the parking lot, she stopped and touched my arm. "Can I see them?" she asked. "The tattoos. Really see them?" I pulled back my jacket sleeve to show her the geometric compass on my forearm. She traced the lines gently with one finger. "Tell me about this one." This was the Singapore deal. The one that took Nexicare International. It happened 2 years ago, and I thought I was going to throw up during the final negotiation because I was so nervous. But we closed it, and that night I sat in a tattoo parlor in Henderson and designed this. The compass represents navigation, finding your own direction even when the map doesn't show where you're going. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked genuine. "Your grandfather would have loved that." "He did." I showed him the design before he died. "Of course you did." We said goodbye and I drove back to my office, feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't everything fixed. But it was progress. It was possibility. The product launch happened the following week and it went better than we'd hoped. The press coverage was strong. Early user feedback was positive. We had 3 new hospital networks requesting demos within the first 48 hours. My team celebrated with champagne and takeout in the conference room, everyone exhausted and elated. Zara cornered me near the end of the night. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it." "No, this was your vision. We just helped build it." I looked around the room at the people who'd believed in Nexicare when it was just slides and promises. People who'd worked late and pushed through setbacks and celebrated every small win along the way. This was my family, I realized. Not by blood, but by choice and shared purpose. A few days later, I got a text from Brooke. "Can we talk?" I almost ignored it. But curiosity got the better of me. "About what?" "Everything. I think we should clear the air." We met at a coffee shop near my office, neutral ground where neither of us had the advantage. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop open and papers spread across the table. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. "What did you want to talk about?" She closed her laptop and gathered the papers into a neat stack. "I wanted to say that I was wrong about you." "Wrong how?" "I thought you were trying to sabotage things. I thought you were using the codicil as revenge for feeling left out. But Dad showed me the revenue reports from your company. He showed me the contracts and the press coverage. And I realized you didn't need to sabotage anything. You'd already succeeded on your own terms. I tried to tell you that." "I know. I didn't want to hear it. Because if I acknowledged that you'd succeeded, then I had to acknowledge that maybe I wasn't the only successful one in the family. That maybe the path I chose wasn't the only valid path." I sipped my coffee, letting her continue. "I've spent my entire life doing what was expected. Law school, the right internships, the partnership track. And I thought that's what success looked like. But watching you fight for the board seat, watching you refuse to back down, I realized something. You're braver than I am. You risked everything to build something that mattered to you. I just followed a script. There's nothing wrong with following a script if it's what you actually want. But is it what I want? Or is it just what I've always done because it made Mom and Dad happy?" I didn't have an answer for that. It was a question she'd have to figure out for herself. "For what it's worth," I said, "you're good at what you do. Dad told me you've brought in more new clients in the past 2 years than any other partner. That's real achievement." She smiled slightly. "Thanks. And for what it's worth, your tattoos are actually pretty beautiful. Once you know the stories behind them." We talked for another hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was honest. We acknowledged the distance between us without pretending it didn't exist. We made tentative plans to get coffee again in a few weeks. No promises, no dramatic reconciliation. Just two people trying to figure out if they could build something new from the ruins of their old relationship. 3 months later, I stood in front of a mirror in a hotel room in Denver, adjusting the collar of my blazer. The Healthcare Innovation Conference was happening downstairs, and in 40 minutes I'd be giving the keynote speech to an audience of 300 industry leaders. My slides were loaded. My notes were memorized. I'd practiced the delivery a dozen times. But I still felt the flutter of nerves in my stomach that always came before moments like this. My phone buzzed. A text from Zara, break a leg. You've got this. Another from Kay, remember to breathe and smile. You look terrifying when you're too serious. And one from my father, looking forward to hearing your talk. I'm in the third row. That last one surprised me. He hadn't mentioned he was coming. I'd sent him the conference details weeks ago but assumed he'd be too busy. The fact that he'd flown out here without telling me felt significant in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I took the elevator down to the conference hall and checked in with the organizers. They walked me through the stage setup and microphone positioning. The room was already filling with attendees, people in business casual attire holding coffee cups and conference programs. I spotted my father exactly where he said he'd be, third row center, reading through the program with reading glasses perched on his nose. The moderator introduced me with a bio that highlighted Nexicare's growth and impact. I walked onto the stage to polite applause and stood behind the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. For a moment, the old anxiety tried to surface. The voice that said I didn't belong here, that I was an imposter, that eventually everyone would realize I had no idea what I was doing. But then I caught my father's eye. He gave me a small nod, the kind of gesture that said he was paying attention, that he was really seeing me. And something in me settled. I started talking about the origins of Nexicare, about the problem I'd identified during a summer internship at a rural clinic where diagnostic delays were causing preventable complications. I talked about the first prototype we'd built on a shoestring budget, the rejections from investors who didn't understand the market, the hospital administrator who took a chance on us when no one else would. Then I talked about growth and scale and the challenges of maintaining quality while expanding rapidly. I showed metrics demonstrating how our platform had reduced diagnostic errors and improved patient outcomes across multiple hospital systems. I discussed the technical architecture and the machine learning models that powered our recommendations. But mostly, I talked about purpose. About building something that mattered beyond profit margins and valuation multiples. About the letters we received from patients whose conditions had been caught early because of our technology. About the doctors who told us our tools had made them better at their jobs. When I finished, the applause was louder and more sustained than I'd expected. People stood. My father was one of them. I saw him smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child showing him a good report card. Afterward, during the networking reception, people approached me with questions and business cards. Hospital executives wanting demos. Investors interested in our next funding round. Competitors wanting to talk about potential partnerships. I moved through the conversations with practiced ease, collecting contacts and making connections. My father waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That was remarkable," he said. "You sound surprised." "I am. Not because I doubted your ability, but because I'd never actually seen you in your element before. I'd never watched you do what you do." We walked to the hotel bar and found a quiet corner. He ordered scotch. I ordered wine. For a few minutes we just sat there, the silence comfortable instead of weighted. "I've been thinking about something you said," he began. "About how we never asked you about your work. About how we diminished what you'd built. You don't have to rehash this." "I think I do. Because I realized something after your board presentation about modernizing our systems. You weren't just right about the technology. You were right about the whole approach. We've been so focused on maintaining what we had that we stopped thinking about what we could become. That's pretty common with established firms. It's also a recipe for irrelevance. And watching you up there today, talking about innovation and impact and purpose, I understood something. You weren't rejecting the family business. You were showing us what business could be when you built it with intention instead of just inheriting it. I took a sip of wine. I never wanted to reject anything. I just wanted to build something that was mine. I know that now. I should have known it years ago. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather case. He set it on the table between us. What's this? Open it. Inside was a fountain pen, elegant and simple, with my initials engraved on the barrel. It was beautiful, the kind of gift that showed thought and attention. Your grandfather gave me a pen like this when I joined the firm, he said. He told me that every signature matters, that every deal you close is part of your legacy. I thought you should have one too. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the smoothness of the finish. Thank you. There's an inscription on the clip. I tilted it to catch the light. Carved in tiny letters were the words, "Leave proof of your existence." My breath caught. Those were my grandfather's words, the ones he'd written in his journal. My father had remembered. He said that to you too? I asked. He said it to everyone he mentored. But I think he meant it most for you. He saw something in you that I missed. He saw someone who would build instead of just maintain. We talked for another hour, covering ground we'd never touched before. He told me about the early days of taking over the firm from my grandfather, about the pressure and expectations and fear of failing. I told him about the first time a major deal almost fell apart, about the panic and self-doubt and eventual triumph when I figured out how to salvage it. For the first time, we talked as equals. Not parent and child, not established businessman and upstart entrepreneur, just two people who'd chosen difficult paths and figured out how to walk them. When we finally said goodnight, he hugged me. Not the stiff, obligatory hug of family gatherings, but something real and sustained. I'm proud of you, he said. I should have told you that a long time ago. I flew back to Phoenix the next morning and went straight to the office. The team had left congratulatory notes on my desk. Zara had put together a highlight reel of social media responses to my keynote. Kay had dropped off a small cactus plant with a note that said, "For your collection of things that thrive in harsh conditions." That afternoon, I had a video call with the board of Hartford and Associates. The acquisition had officially closed the week before. The new owners were evaluating the existing structure and deciding which partners to retain. My abstention period was over. I now had full voting rights on all matters. The managing director led the call, walking through integration plans and timeline. At the end, he addressed me directly. Ms. Hartford, the new ownership has reviewed your background and the technology modernization proposal you submitted. They're impressed with your track record and they'd like to discuss an expanded advisory role, specifically around digital transformation and innovation strategy. What would that look like? Quarterly consulting engagement, separate from your board duties. They'd compensate you at market rates for your expertise. I glanced at the other faces on the screen. My father looked pleased. Brooke looked neutral, which for her was progress. The other partners seemed cautiously optimistic. I'd be interested in discussing that, I said. Send me the details and I'll review them. After the call ended, I sat in my office watching the afternoon light angle through the windows. My phone buzzed with messages from people who'd seen clips from my keynote. LinkedIn notifications from people wanting to connect. An email from a journalist asking to interview me for a profile on women in health tech. 5 years ago I'd been sitting in a tiny apartment, sketching out ideas for an AI platform that didn't exist yet, wondering if I was crazy to think I could build something that mattered. Now I had a team, clients across 6 countries, recognition from my industry, and grudging respect from my family. I pulled out the fountain pen my father had given me and tested it on a notepad. The ink flowed smooth and dark. I wrote my name, then underneath it, Nexicare Solutions, founder and CEO. Then, Hartford and Associates, board member. 2 identities that had seemed incompatible were finally coexisting. Not because my family had changed completely, but because I'd stopped waiting for permission to claim both. That weekend, my mother hosted what she called a casual family dinner. Almost declined, remembering too many gatherings where casual meant carefully staged and family meant everyone except me. But something made me accept. I showed up wearing jeans and a simple black shirt, the constellation tattoo visible, the phoenix design peeking out near my wrist. I didn't cover them. I didn't apologize for them. I walked in exactly as I was. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and fresh bread. My mother hugged me at the door, then stepped back to look at me properly. "Show me," she said. "Show you what?" "The tattoos. All of them. I want to see what I've been missing." I rolled up my sleeves and pulled back my collar. She looked at each one carefully, asking questions, actually listening to the answers. When I told her about the mountain range representing the VA contract, she touched it gently. "Your grandfather would have loved this," she said. "He worked with veterans his whole career. He would have been so proud. I wish he could have seen it." He did see it. Maybe not this specific contract, but he saw what you were capable of. That's why he wrote that codicil. Inside, the dining room table was set for 8. My father was at the grill outside. Brooke sat on the couch talking to Cousin Trevor. Aunt Pauline was arranging flowers in a vase. Everything looked normal, familiar. But when I walked in, Brooke stood up. "Sienna, can I show you something?" She led me down the hall to the home office where my father kept his files and awards. On the wall, in the spot where family photos usually hung, was something new. A framed collage that Brooke had clearly put together herself. It showed articles about Nexicare, the Forbes profile, screenshots of my keynote, and in the center, a photo someone had taken of me at the conference standing in front of my slides. Underneath, in careful calligraphy, were the words, "Sienna Hartford, building the future." "I made this," Brooke said. "I thought it should be here, with all the other family achievements." I stared at it, not trusting myself to speak. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were doing," she continued. "I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between your path and being part of this family. You shouldn't have had to fight this hard to be seen." "Thank you," I managed. "Also, I'm getting a tattoo." I looked at her, surprised. "You're what?" "A tattoo. Small one, probably on my ankle. I haven't decided what yet, but I think I'm ready to mark something permanent. Something that's mine." We walked back to the living room together. Dinner was served on the back patio, the desert sunset turning everything golden. The conversation flowed easily, touching on work and travel plans and Aunt Pauline's ongoing feud with her homeowners association. At one point, Trevor asked about Nexicare's expansion plans. I started to give a brief answer, but my father interrupted. "Actually, Sienna just gave the keynote at the National Healthcare Innovation Conference. It was extraordinary. She should tell you about it." So I did. I talked about the speech and the response and the new partnerships it had generated. Everyone listened, asking real questions, showing genuine interest. When I mentioned the new advisory role with Hartford and Associates, my mother raised her glass. "To Sienna," she said. "For teaching us that success comes in many forms." We clinked glasses and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not quite belonging, that might never come completely. But acceptance. Recognition. Space to be myself without apologizing for it. After dinner, I helped my mother clear plates. In the kitchen, she paused with her hands in the soapy water. "Your grandfather left me a letter too," she said. "It was in his papers, dated the same time as the codicil. He told me that I needed to let you fly, even if your flight path looked different from what I'd imagined. He said that the hardest thing about being a parent is accepting that your children's dreams aren't your dreams, and that's exactly how it should be. Why didn't you tell me that before?" "Because I wasn't ready to hear it myself. I kept thinking if I just waited long enough, you'd come back to the version of success I understood. But you never did. You built something better." She dried her hands and turned to face me. "I know I can't make up for the years I didn't see you clearly. But I'd like to try. I'd like to know my actual daughter, not the one I kept trying to shape you into." I'd like that too. We rejoined the others on the patio. The evening air had cooled and someone had started a fire in the outdoor fireplace. I sat in one of the comfortable chairs and watched my family move around me, laughing and talking and existing in their imperfect, complicated way. My phone buzzed with a notification. An email from one of the hospital networks I'd met at the conference. They wanted to schedule a demo and discuss a multi-year contract. I smiled and made a mental note to follow up on Monday. Kay texted asking how the dinner was going. I sent back a photo of the sunset and wrote, "Better than expected. Might actually survive this family after all." As the evening wound down, I said my goodbyes and walked to my car. The street was quiet, just the sound of crickets and distant traffic. I sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine, looking back at the house where I'd grown up. It would never be simple. My family would never be the effortlessly supportive, unconditionally accepting group I'd wished for as a kid. But they were trying. And after years of being invisible, trying felt like enough. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool night air rush through the car. My apartment was dark when I arrived, but it felt welcoming instead of empty. I turned on a single lamp and made tea, then sat on my couch with my grandfather's journal. I hadn't opened it in months, but tonight I needed to read his words again. I flipped to the last page, to the note he'd written for me. Build something that matters. Leave proof of your existence. Make them remember you were here. I'd done that. Not just through Nexicare, though that was part of it. But through the fight to claim my place, through refusing to be erased, through standing up and saying my voice mattered even when everyone around me suggested it didn't. The tattoos on my skin weren't just markers of business success. They were evidence of a journey, proof that I'd walked my own path and survived. Each line of ink represented not just a deal closed but a moment when I'd chosen myself, when I'd believed in my vision even when no one else did. I pulled out the fountain pen my father had given me and a fresh notebook. I started writing, not for an audience or a purpose, just capturing thoughts and observations and plans for what came next. There were new markets to explore, new products to develop, new challenges that would require everything I'd learned and more I hadn't figured out yet. But I was ready for them. Not because I had all the answers, not because I'd finally won my family's approval, but because I knew who I was and what I was capable of building. My phone lit up one last time. A text from Dante, "Heard your keynote went well. Proud of you, kid. Let me know when you want to talk about Series B funding. I think you're ready." I smiled and set the phone down. Series B funding meant scaling faster, hiring more people, taking on bigger challenges. It meant more pressure and risk and late nights wondering if I'd made the right call. But it also meant growth, impact, the chance to help more patients and push the technology further than I'd imagined. I wrote back, "Let's talk next week." I'm ready. Because I was. Not just for the next funding round or the next deal or the next family dinner where I'd have to prove myself all over again. I was ready for all of it, the beautiful and difficult work of building a life that was entirely my own. The tattoos would stay. New ones would probably join them as new milestones arrived. But they were no longer defensive markers, proof I had to wave in people's faces to justify my choices. They were simply part of my story, visual chapters in an ongoing narrative that I was writing one decision at a time. I looked down at my forearm, at the geometric compass pointing in multiple directions at once. That had always been the real message, I realized. Not that there was one correct path, but that you could forge your own direction and trust yourself to navigate whatever terrain you found there. My family had laughed at my stupid tattoos, right up until they learned what each one represented. But even if they'd never learned, even if they'd never acknowledged the deals or the revenue or the success, these marks would still mean something. They'd mean I'd chosen courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, my own definition of success over anyone else's expectations. And that was enough. That would always be enough. I closed the journal and turned off the lamp, letting the city lights filtering through my windows provide the only illumination. Somewhere out there, other people were fighting their own battles for recognition, building their own dreams, carving their own paths through families and industries and worlds that tried to tell them who they should be. I hoped they'd find the strength to keep going. I hoped they'd mark their victories in whatever way felt true to them. I hoped they'd learn what I'd finally figured out after years of struggle. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need approval to succeed. You just need the courage to show up as yourself and the persistence to keep building even when it's hard. Everything else is just noise. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.